Thank you. I'm sure everybody's super excited to hear from people who came all the way from Brazil to meet you guys and talk about what's going on there. I'm a Brazilian citizen, so obviously I'm super excited as well. And I just wanted to start by saying, 500 years ago, when the Portuguese came to Brazil, they sent letters back home saying, listen, we found the land of opportunity. Wherever you plant here, turns into gold. And people actually believe that. And that perception was carried on over the 500 years. And I believe in that, and these guys believed in it, and they went for it. But, perception is one thing, reality is another thing. Yes, it is the land of opportunity, but this land of opportunity goes through cycles, ups and downs. And what you're going to hear today is the viewpoint of entrepreneurs, investors, people who were on both sides. They're very different, but what unites them is the fact that when they went into Brazil, they understood the cycles, and they went there for the long term, with the long-term vision of investment and taking advantage of what's out there. But let's hear from the experts. I want to introduce you to them. Let's start with the entrepreneur, because we always start with the entrepreneurs. Eric Santos, CEO of Resultados Digitais, very successful startup that is similar to HubSpot in the US, and they have recently raised a round A. So congratulations to you, Eric. Shall we start?
Hello. Hi. Thanks, guys. Really glad to be here, and glad that you stick with us for this last session and to talk about Brazil. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about soccer. That was one of the subjects backstage. But we're going to talk about startups, and I'm pretty sure that we can fill that slot very well. So a little background for me. I've been an entrepreneur in Brazil for the last 10 years. Even before that, I did work for some startups there, did some tech projects. So seen my fair share of what's going on there, and what kind of challenges and opportunities that we have as entrepreneurs, and some of the opportunities that the investors have there as well. Let me see how this... It's not working.
Mm-hmm. Oops.
Okay. As Eveline said, my company is called Resultados Digitais. We're the leading marketing management and automation platform in Brazil. If you guys know HubSpot and Marketo, we do something similar to them, but we have our own important twists and adaptations to the Brazilian context, and also things that we think that are important to other emerging markets as well, in terms of business model, go-to-market strategy, product strategy, everything. So we have a software that has features among SEO, social media management, email marketing, landing pages, lead nurturing, analytics. And as we like to say, we eat our own dog food, so we create a lot of content. We do a lot of online marketing to generate leads for our business. Right now, we generate more than 20,000 leads every month. And we are in a good position of authority in Brazil. We have about 100K fans on Facebook, just to give you an idea. I know it's a vanity metric, but for a B2B company, it's not something very common. And well, this talk is not about my company, it's about Brazil. So just to finish off this introduction, I will just share with you, I'm not sure if you've all seen this covers from The Economist. The left one was published about 4 years ago, right? 2009. And the right one was a very recent publication. And there's been this debate about whether Brazil is going to regain the growth rate that we had in the last years, or as some say there, if we just had a chicken flight. But we as entrepreneurs, we couldn't care less about that, because the tech sector is still growing a lot. So we have a widespread adoption of internet, and it's still growing. Massive adoption of mobile phones there. social media consumption there is amazing. It's higher than any other country in the world. So we have the good conditions to make good tech business there. Of course, we have a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we're going to discuss in this panel. That it's not very easy to do business in Brazil, even for us Brazilians, but especially for people who go there and don't quite understand the dynamics of the market. So I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion, and I'm glad to share my point of views with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our second guest, also coming straight from Brazil, is Patrick Arippol, principal with DGF Innova, which is a very important VC firm in Brazil, but he used to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, Patrick, let me switch to the other side.
Hello, hello. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. Pleasure being here. Good afternoon, everybody. It's been very enticing feeling the energy here in Kiev. And getting to know it for the first time. I think I can speak for most of the people here, or at least me and Eric. It's the first time here in Kiev. And if you know as little about Brazil as I did know about Kiev until now, hopefully we'll share some of our insight of what happened there, and hopefully some of the lessons that might be relevant for you guys here that are investing as well as doing startups. So first, a quick introduction of who, just by way of background, so that you know that my opinions will be tainted by my experience, of course. I represent DGF. We're a group in Brazil that has been doing growth investments primarily and also early stage for about 15 years, which for Brazil timeframes, it's quite a bit. I mean, there's been a lot of investors that have launched in Brazil in the last 5+ years because of the wave and the hype, if you will, that took place in Brazil. But so I'll talk briefly about us. We basically have 3 practices. We have the early stage practice. We have, and that's one that I head, so basically we do Series A investments. We have a growth practice in which we have 2 funds that are active, and also a special thesis where we invested in some clean tech bioenergy companies as well. Basically, I mean, a summary of who we are. We have, I guess, a pretty deep network in Brazil, and also we try to do the bridge with Silicon Valley, which nowadays has become very important. So our international angle has been more of that angle rather than going to Europe so far, but hopefully that's going to change. Some of the companies that I think illustrate the kind of things that we do are listed here. So we have basically a lot of software companies. Our core is really enterprise software. So we invest in mostly B2B, mobile, cloud, big data, and a few of the companies we invested in. MasterSaf is a leading tax software company. It was bought by Thomson Reuters recently. Well, we have a number of other examples. WAPA is funny that it's a market that became very hot in Brazil right now, around the world, which is taxi reservation through cell phones. And this is a leading company, but few people know about it because it has a B2B angle. So basically, it sells a solution to companies because companies pay 70% of taxis in Brazil. So that's the company called WAPA. Digitais is a company that basically is the leading, it's a shutterfly model, it's a leading company in Brazil, and so on. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we look for. Small text, sorry about that, but basically this is a snapshot of what we look for. So we look for the companies that already have some early traction proven. As I mentioned, mostly B2B related businesses. It's an early fund. Basically, this is a fund we launched last year. And by way of background too, we have a very solid LP base in this fund. So we have 1 large institutional investor and also 36 successful entrepreneurs from all over the world. And these people really leverage a lot of deal flow, of insights, and so forth. And anyway, so I think that's it. Just personally, actually, in terms of background, I'm formerly an entrepreneur. I don't know if there's such a thing as former entrepreneur. I think once you're an entrepreneur, you're always an entrepreneur. But I launched a startup in Brazil, in e-health, back in 1999, and then a startup in Silicon Valley in mobile payments later on. So we try to really bring in some of that experience of Silicon Valley with Brazil, and also of knowing what startups go through, essentially, so that we can help our portfolio companies a little more. So thanks, and I look forward to chatting more with you guys.
Thank you. The next guest is José Marim, director with Viajanet. Viajanet is a company that does $300 million in gross sales every year. And José Marim has tremendous experience in implementing proven models in emerging countries. So thank you.
Thank you. Dobry večer. I hope that after this talk, you guys would be much more motivated to build a company, because doing business in emerging markets is very complicated, but also very, very exciting. So let me tell you very quickly about Viajanet. Viajanet is one of the companies that we founded and that we co-founded, and I think it's a very interesting situation. Let me tell you a little bit about, very quickly, what's happening in Latin America and travel. I mean, as you can see, Latin America is one of the biggest growth spaces in the world for travel, which I think clearly attracts the attention of a lot of people. Also, the penetration of online travel overall, it's pretty low, which means and suggests that the growth that has to happen in the next years would be very, very significant. No? If you see some of the projections here, you know, the market is going to double for online traveling in the next 4 years. So I mean, that anyone playing in that space and doing things, I would say, relatively right, should be able to, you know, to do well if you build a great product with a differentiated strategy. So very quickly, Viajanet, as you can see, this is not a company that is 15, 20 years old. You know, this is a company that was launched in the end of 2009, and exponential growth has basically hit the company. No, I mean, we have had to struggle with a lot of the issues that you have when you build a business. But one of the things to highlight is that we have more than 4 million visitors today and over 14 million page views per month. So, you know, at the end, it's about, you know, differentiating, building a good product, building a fantastic user experience for your clients. Now, some of the other things, you know, that differentiate us. There is a very strong player in the market called Decolar. The interesting story here is that when we entered the market, everybody said, well, you know, how are you going to compete with a player that has been there for 10 years, that is very big, you know, and that basically owns a very significant chunk of the online market? And I think that what we've been able to do was to find a niche in series, I would say, on a different segment of the population that basically was starting to buy online, and that Decolar was not necessarily targeting. And what we did was not only target them, but to provide them with a very differentiated experience in terms of, you know, how we took care of them, what type of customer service we provide, and what type of user experience we were able to build on the product. No? So I guess that allowed us to differentiate and to focus, you know, on a segment that was nascent. And if we could, as it happened, if we took good care of them, you know, they were customers that were coming back and buying again from us. And as you know, this is key in e-commerce. So I mean, just as a product overview, I mean, we sell international air tickets, domestic air tickets, hotels and packages. The only important thing to highlight there is that the domestic market in Brazil is about 70% of the total travel market, which is not necessarily the same case in other countries. And this also, you know, poses some complications and some barriers for other people because, you know, there's no GDSs. GDSs are the consolidators that basically provide content to people that want to buy air. So here, in order to be able to provide that content, you need to connect directly with airlines. And this obviously creates some very interesting barriers and some complexities that, you know, that have to be sorted. Again, I talked briefly about this before. You know, we are able to tap into a large and growing market. We are now one of the 2 independent OTAs. We have a very differentiated positioning. We have a great team and a world-class management. Now, how do we differentiate on this very quickly? We believe that we have an integrated approach. We have a great track record in Brazil. We have scale, and we are independent. So this clearly positions us like a very solid second player in the market, which we believe is going to be very attractive in the future. And lastly, what I want to mention here is operating in Brazil is not necessarily easy, and I suspect that operating in Ukraine would have, if not as many challenges as we faced in Brazil. And a lot of the barriers that Brazil has not allowed some of the big players to come and operate there efficiently. I mean, you have companies like, you know, Expedia, eDreams, or DGF, etc., and they have tried to enter the market, not necessarily always with the most successful strategy, despite the fact that they have very deep pockets, no? So, basically operating in Brazil on a business that is local has its tricks, and what we've tried to do was basically find those tricks and try to basically build a good business. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now I want to see from the investors who made a bet in Brazil, also looking from the outside, so that side of the panel, the foreign investors. When you got there, did your results meet your expectations? How is growth in Brazil right now? And what results you're getting, and what are the most successful online sectors?
I'll just start. I mean, so a lot of questions in one question, I guess.
Yeah.
So one thing, did we get the results that we expected? And the answer is pretty much always no, because everything is just harder than it is in real, that you would have expected. But that's true for everything, right? So that's nothing is Brazilian specific, I think. We first came in 2009 or so, and back then I think the times were still a bit different. Like the whole online consumer ecosystem which we were active was not as developed, so tools were not available yet. The cost for traffic was lower, so everything you could grow faster even maybe. But for me the most important aspect is you have to be there for the long run anyway. So it doesn't really matter if right now the situation is a bit more tough and so on. Yes, it is. It's not that easy to get follow-on financing right now. The overall situation might not be that good, the funding environment, but that doesn't really matter because we're in there for the long run anyway. So actually for us, now that the growth is a bit slower, actually it's a good time because we are still committed to do investments, and it's actually possible now, I think, or even better than before, to pick up very good teams at very good valuations. And that is what we're trying to do right now. So in the beginning, yes, it was euphoric times. It was clear to us that everything happens in waves, and there's more friction as you go, and things become more complicated and more competitive. But that's totally fine. I think that doesn't change a thing about our perception of Brazil being a really great emerging market. And for us, the very first international expansion, it was a very deliberate decision. It was clear to us that we want to go there because of personal preference, because of all the business ties we had, and we're going to stay there. And that is my conviction. And even though growth might be slow right now, I'm still convinced we're going to get out of it in the end. So far, we're very happy. But you have to be there for the long run anyway. Otherwise, don't even bother going there.
José Marín, do you share the experience?
I have to say that I share a lot of the things that Uwe is saying. What I would say is when you go to do business in an emerging market, you need to think long term. And at the end, you're going to have to be living into a whole bunch of cycles. Latin America is about cycles. And sometimes you're up, sometimes are down. But what really matters is that you believe on the future of the country itself. And what I can say is just think about a market like Brazil. I mean, 50% of the Latin American internet users are there. So, at the end, if you build a business in Brazil and you are successful, you have a very good probability of building a very big business. Now, it is very likely that it's going to take you longer. And one of the things that we are seeing right now in Brazil, which is actually, I would say, it's a bit painful because from a stage where everything was incredibly hot, very quickly things started to cool down. And I would say there were a lot of companies early stage that were funded by angel investors or by angel money, which was basically raises of 100K, 300K, 700K. But then as those companies start to mature, they start to require additional capital. And the Series A, Series B crunch that you are seeing in Brazil is significantly more evident than the one that you see in the US or other places. So at the end, you need to plan for that. And as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that it can be very painful because, suddenly, from being in a place where everybody wants to give you money, nobody wants to give you money. And you need to navigate that, that situation and just think that this goes on cycles. And whenever you have the opportunity to get cash, and then navigate through that. And from the investor's point of view, I think that it is today the moment when you can do great things in Brazil. Now, the approach to investing there, I think, has to be slightly different because, as I said before, not necessarily there's enough follow-on capital. So I think that as an investor, when you find a company that you like, you need to forget about the Silicon Valley strategy of, you know what, I go out to the market, I price it, and someone else come and gives me money. If that doesn't happen, which is the case in Brazil, it won't happen in a lot of times. You know, you still have to have the conviction that if you like the management team, if you like the results that you are seeing, I mean, keep funding those businesses and keep committing to them in a very fair way to entrepreneurs, price the subsequent rounds properly, and keep supporting those companies. I mean, there is investors that have done this in Latin America very successfully, companies like Tiger Global, that have basically supported companies throughout like this, and they are having fantastic successes. So I think it's about long-term, as it's been said before, and it's about being able to navigate a lot of uncertainty and a lot of complexities.
Great. So, so I hear about the round B wall, the issue with the round B, not being able to raise the funds that you would expect. So let's switch a little bit to the VC ecosystem. I want to learn from Patrick, for instance, who has tremendous experience in VC, what's going on in Brazil. And I understand there are some GPs of global funds that allocate some portions of their funds into Brazil. I understand there are some local funds like DGF. I understand that some of the major players in Silicon Valley actually put some ground presence in Brazil. So there's all these things going, but it's still pretty tough. Or is it not the case? Tell me, what is the ecosystem of the VC in Brazil?
Of course. Hello? So it's a great question. I mean, it was very exciting. It was really thrilling to watch what went on in the Brazil market, because when I was in 2010 in Silicon Valley, there was a lot of hype around Brazil. And before I decided to move back, I said, let me meet entrepreneurs. Let's see really what's going on in the trenches. And the two things really struck me. One was more negative, which is a lot of the hype is short-lived, because obviously 2008, 2009 were very bad years all over the world. Brazil, its macroeconomic scenario, which was part of the reason for that picture that in The Economist that Eric showed, was thriving, was doing well. It was growing at 7% a year when it had never grown at that rate. But it was definitely hype, because a lot of the fundamentals in Brazil had not changed. And so this adjustment was expected. And the other thing in 2010, and by the way, 2010 was 10 years after I tried doing startups in Brazil. And at that point, if you did startups, you had to be a little crazy. At least people perceived you that way. In the beginning, people kind of said, if you're doing a startup, it's because you can't get a job elsewhere. There's a lot of that cultural dogma in Brazil. So anyways, from 2000 to 2010, there was a huge progress. But at the same time, one of the things that was really clear is that there were a lot of business fundamentals. Enormous markets really turning online. So not just internet users, but a lot of internet users buying. A number of small companies that you couldn't really sell software to before. Now they buy software. There's 5 million companies in Brazil. It's a very large market for SMBs. So those things led me to want to move to Brazil. And anyways, by way of background. But from then until now, basically what happened, to your question, Eveline, is a lot of investors came in. They wanted to try Brazil. They wanted to wet their feet. And that has receded. A few have wet their feet, thought the water was too cold or too hot, and withdrew. So many of them decided, I'm just going to make a few investments. I'm going to stop investing in Brazil. And a few have anchored in Brazil, really. So I think today, how is the ecosystem? You have the long-established funds in Brazil, which there are 3. We're one of them. And by long, I mean over 15 years. There's basically 3 firms. There's the flying-in investors, funds that Sequoias, Benchmark, and you name it. A lot of the blue chip VCs that do some deals here and there, and eventually they come down and follow those companies, and they look at opportunities more on a case-by-case basis. And then you have new investors, and there's quite a few of those, like Project A, of course, and Expansión. I mean, actually, you've been doing it for a long time too. So the ecosystem has really become very interesting, because what you were able to see in 2012 and 2013 was valuations very high. You saw a lot of copycat strategies. Some of those made a lot of sense, some did not. So obviously the ones that did not, now they're basically understanding that it's not exactly the same market as they thought. And another thing that happened too is that you had a lot of investments in the same thesis. I mean, it's very tough when you have 5 companies, well-backed, trying to do the same thing. In the end, you end up really messing your margins. So those are a few of the dynamics that took place. I think from our outlook, to your question, we think it's a great time, frankly, because being an entrepreneur and being an investor is really about resilience, is really having a strategy. It's, if possible, having your capital lined up, or having a strategy where you're not going to depend as much on capital, or at least having that option to be profitable and so forth. So we see it very positively, the time frame right now. And the funds, from our outlook, when we think of funds to co-invest with, we've found a few. eVentures, together with Redpoint, has established itself. And that's pretty much the only one that has really set roots deep from the Silicon Valley entities, at least. So anyways, it's an interesting market right now.
So I guess part of the audience is, VC firms, especially from Eastern Europe. Any additional tips you want to give to them if they are exploring the, opportunity of Brazil? Any suggestions, advice?
Oh, absolutely. A few thoughts. I mean, first of all, as Jose put very well, I think there's a lot of cycles in Latin America. And there's going to be more cycles too. So just be prepared for that. The other interesting point is, if you think of co-investing with somebody, make sure you understand who are the co-investors. Try to understand who would be folks that are around, and really know the local aspects that might complement your view from being a European-based fund, an American-based fund, etc. Another, which is not so much a suggestion as much as a provocation, if you will, is I think out of the box a little bit, because I think there's a lot of models also beyond copycats, or there's variations that are very significant from companies that are copycats that really, if you get something right about the model, you can really grow, because the market is quite large. So I think anyone who's interested, and by the way, it's funny how in this trip I found there's a lot of similarities in between the human capital dynamics in Ukraine and Brazil. Very talented computer scientists, very creative entrepreneurs, and a maturing market to a very large extent. So there's a lot of similarities, and I'm hoping from this trip or later on, there's going to be a lot more collaboration that will be possible between the two countries.
Okay, so Eric, as far as I understand, you just raised a round A. How hard was it? How easy was it? How long did it take you?
Well, first I have to say that I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs there in Brazil, so I really see that there's a crunch, there's Series A, Series B crunch, but especially on the B2C sector, that those companies are really capital intensive. So I see a lot of B2B companies getting funded and being able to go to the next step and getting funded again, raising another round. So, and I would say that maybe it's because of their perception that capital isn't always available. So you have to be focused on revenue, getting as quick as possible back on cash flow positive, which is, of course, not the case if you're investing in a big B2C brand. But, well, to sum up, it wasn't very hard for us.
How long did it take you?
It took less than 3 months to get the term sheet.
You talked to how many investors?
I talked to about 5 investors, but all of them I knew
Amazing.
Before.
What's your secret sauce?
I don't know. I mean, I kept in touch with them since the beginning of my company. So they saw the progress there. I wasn't just a single data point when I talked to them for the first time when I was raising. I bootstrapped the company for about over a year, actually. We got to first break even, and raise a seed round, and then we got to break even again. So I think that was one of the reasons that we actually didn't need the money. We needed the money to grow faster, but we were in the need for the money. So I think that's one of the reasons that the process went smoothly for us. And also because I think the next wave of good investments in Brazil will be in the B2B sector, especially those companies that are targeting small, medium-sized business. As Patrick said, there are 5 million small companies in Brazil. There are a lot of companies trying to do something creative in that space. And I think there's good economics there.
Yeah, I just want to say something, and probably this is going to sound much more from the entrepreneurial side than from the investor side. The truth is that building companies today is significantly easier than what it was years ago. When I started my first company, you know, I had to spend about $1.5 million on servers. The same type of investment today to do the same thing that I did at the time probably would be $30,000. So the cost of building a business and the barrier of building a business is lowering and lowering. So, I mean, I just want to give that across because I think it's a perfect time to be an entrepreneur and to take the risk. And people say, well, if I'm going to go and, you know, build a company and I don't succeed, my career is over. That's not true. I mean, at the early stage of the career of someone, you know, it would be an amazing experience to take that risk, even if you fail. Even if you fail and you don't want to be an entrepreneur again, it will still be an amazing opportunity, and that doesn't mean you will not have other opportunities later. Together with that, I mean, my friends from Endeavor have been talking about a very interesting concept on entrepreneurship, where they say that, you know, the main driver of future growth in countries is entrepreneurship. If you think about it, and you see some numbers, there is only 200,000 companies in the world that create 60–70% of the total revenue, which means that, you know, you guys have an opportunity to make a difference in your country. I mean, if you go into one of your businesses as an entrepreneur and you build a big company, believe me, there's going to be a network that is going to basically extrapolate from that. You are going to become a mentor of other companies, and eventually you're going to play a very, very big role in the way that your country develops in the future. So I just wanted to make these comments because I think it's an incredible and exciting situation to be in, and as a former entrepreneur, I can say that you know, it can get very hard and very challenging in a lot of times, but at the same time, it's incredibly rewarding and fun.
Great. Now, José Marin, you have experience investing in Eastern Europe as well, right? Brazil, Eastern Europe. Can you compare? How is it to invest in Brazil compared to invest in Eastern Europe?
I mean, I would say that obviously for me it is easier to invest in Brazil than in Eastern Europe, but not necessarily because it's easier, just because I know it much better. You know, I've been operating in Brazil for a long time, and I know the market very well. The strategy that we followed in Russia was, you know, to partner up, well, to invest on someone that I knew very well before, very smart entrepreneur who happened to have gone to Stanford, like both Patrick and myself. And we had that bond of trust, which is very, very important. And they helped us navigate into the Russian market. So we invested a small amount of capital into a company called Wikimart. And basically, you know, we started to learn. And we started to learn, we started to interact with other entrepreneurs, and that helped us learn. So to your point straight, there is a lot of similarities of what you see in Brazil and what you see here. You have a lot of complexity from the bureaucratic side of things. It's not easy to set up a company. It's not easy to, you know, manage the accounting side of things, to open a bank account. Then, you know, the tax regulation can get very complicated. And those are all similarities that you see both in Russia, Ukraine, and Brazil. On the positive side, as I said before, there is also similarities from the talent point of view. I feel that talent is here. The entrepreneurial vibe that I get when I'm in Ukraine is fantastic. People want to build things. They are very excited about, you know, making a difference. And people are entrepreneurial. They, you know, you see them. You see most of the people saying, you know, I want to build this business. Why? Probably because, you know, as the Berlin Wall fell, you know, you had the opportunity to see a lot of people that were able to capitalize on starting their own companies and being very successful. So I think that has motivated a lot of entrepreneurs to do that. And I would say that that's something that stands out for me more in Ukraine than it is in Brazil. I feel that there is a more entrepreneurial culture here. At the same time, you also have very good technical universities, so that gives a very good base and background for companies in the technology side that are being built. I work a lot with programmers around the world, and I've always been very positively impressed by the talent that I find here. So, I think there is a lot of similarities. There's also clearly some differences, but you also have a big market. Ukraine is a big enough market, maybe not as big as Brazil, and the timing is right. You have the opportunity to build because there's not that much competition yet in our space, and I would just think that it's very attractive to start thinking which spaces, which sectors, and kind of very similar to what happens in Brazil.
Interesting. Well, one thing that Brazil also shares with Ukraine is the lack of support from the public sector. However, very recently, the Brazilian government has launched a program called Startup Brazil, and they are planning to allocate about 100 million reais, about $50 million, to startups that are based in Brazil, but not necessarily Brazilian startups. And they have partnered with a few accelerators to incubate those teams and generate, jobs for the Brazilian economy. I wanted to hear from the Brazilian side of the panel, how is that program working in Brazil? Any thoughts? And how could that be applied here, maybe?
It's an interesting point because this is a very recent phenomenon.
Can you close it? Close it.
Hello?
Yeah,
Oops,
that's
okay.
better.
Not so close. So it's a very recent phenomenon in Brazil. The distance in between government and business has always been enormous in Brazil, and particularly in startups. The government had no concept of how it could really fuel startup companies. And the interesting thing from all of this phase in Brazil is that now they have realized how critical it is. So just that realization, which was what germinated this effort, the Brazil startup effort, is great. I mean, and a very solid example of how that is a true effort is that the guy that was hired, he was a former entrepreneur. He worked in an accelerator. And he was the kind of guy that was banging his head against the wall, if you will, but really working hard at making startups get off the ground. So just by the very fact that he got appointed for this, and he's definitely doing the fights to explain to government and picking which fights are most important, it's a great initial starting point, really. The program, it's very recent, so it's too soon to say if it's going to be successful or not, but the moment is very important. I mean, I also help, I'm very involved with some associations that help to fix the ecosystem, if you will, in Brazil. There's an association of venture capital and private equity that has a venture group, and we've been pushing forward some proposals for the government for a long time. I mean, everywhere from tax breaks to cutting the red tape so that a company can get up and running faster, to the structure which is ideal for international investors to come in and invest. And it's been tough to this date, but right now things are starting to happen. And just by the very example of how these programs are also opening their doors to foreigners. I mean, before Brazil was very, I mean, if there's one thing about Brazil is that a lot of entrepreneurs tended to think of Brazil as it, right? So let's grow our company to reach all of Brazil because it's relatively large and it's somewhat isolated, if you will. So, a lot of entrepreneurs thought that way. But now, especially with the entry of a lot of these, former rocket people who bring a lot of discipline and a lot of aggressiveness into businesses, this is really changing quite a bit. So the government has realized that, and they're they're also investing in startups of foreigners. So that exchange is really fundamentally changing the human capital market in Brazil, and the program is early to say if it's going to be successful, but I think there's already been some good fruits, very positive results so far from that program.
Wonderful. Now,
just
you
to add to what Patrick said, just two things. I think the program has its merits. It tries to work with two of the most difficult things for entrepreneurs to start a company there, which is the first money, that they give 30K or something like that, right, to the program. and they work together with the accelerators. So the entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, they get to learn a lot of things about how to start a company in Brazil, and they get to share experience with entrepreneurs from other countries as well. The problem I see is that only a few companies are getting the benefit of the program, and the government should be focused more on removing the bottlenecks that we have for creating a business, for growing a business, for hiring more people, for things like that. Of course, I know that it's not overnight that you can do that kind of things, but usually in Brazil, they try to go to the easy route when they see some problem. And it seems to me that the program, although it's a very good program in concept, it's one of these easy ways out of fixing the whole thing, you know?
Not really working on the deep root cause, but on the superficial.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to add something?
Sure. Just the one point that Patrick made with, I think what we've seen in Brazil probably in the last year was a big influx of people from Germany, France, those kind of countries, Americans definitely, who saw this huge opportunities, probably initially triggered by reading the BRICS study and then realizing, okay, Brazil is probably the closest to where I can actually deliver some impact, because obviously, you know, compared to India or China, it's much more accessible for us Europeans, at least perceived. And we see a lot of those teams also popping up on our radar in Brazil, but we've moved to a point where we want to make sure that those teams, you know, as well as they are aggressive and, you know, they're very disciplined and so on, but sometimes they also lack a certain aspect, which is know-how, some kind of roots in the market. And, you know, they just assume, oh, we're just going to do it the same way and it will work somehow. In Brazil, in many ways, obviously, it's very special. And if you don't have people in the company that know how to navigate, at least whom to ask and so on, sometimes we're a bit stuck with those guys. You know, we're sure they're going to do a great job, high level of energy, you really want to do it, but we want to make sure that at least, you know, it's just a rule of thumb, but initially it would be great to have a mixed team in such a case, or a totally Brazilian team. It's something we focus on a lot. We get CVs and CVs of, you know, definitely very smart people, you know, graduates from the best MBA schools and so on, but then nothing beats, you know, real Brazilian street smartness also. So that's one of the interesting challenges for us, to see teams that combine the two maybe, or have it fully on the Brazilian side. But the pure expat teams, we're a bit critical actually at the moment. I mean, there's always positive exceptions, right? Don't get me wrong. But the spike in that is something we look at closely. And yeah, definitely something to consider when investing.
Bringing some diversity, Brazil, other players. Speaking about entrepreneurs and team members, you've been exposed to entrepreneurs from many places. What's your perception of Brazilian entrepreneurs versus, you know, Eastern European entrepreneurs?
I'm not sure really if I can make a generalization. I mean, it's just an observation that here as well in Brazil, we meet a lot of great people with a very open mindset, with the right spirit. I think it has been maybe helpful that guys like Rocket have come in and shown, you know, some kind of special way, very German efficient style of doing business. You know, for some people that might have been an interesting inspiration. But in general, I think, yes, it requires more effort for us to look for truly Brazilian players, so to speak, but it's definitely worth it. And I think the quality is definitely, you know, phenomenal there as well. So we have no problems at all finding great people there. Yeah, so definitely the same as here, I think. It's hard to generalize if there's systematic traits that are different. Maybe they are, but, you know, the people we deal with, most of the times, there's really not really. If there's a great team in Germany and a great team in Brazil and a great team in Singapore, they're all great, right? So there's not much difference. It would be hard to find a generalization, I think.
Okay, so now this is a question for all of you. What's the next big thing in Brazil? If you can share that secret.
Well, David definitely knows that.
So
Well,
I'll give you $1 to invest. What are you going to do with it?
In your own company, hopefully.
Yeah, my own company. The second one. As I said before, I think the SMBs sector in Brazil is pretty hot right now. Because the companies are going online and then they need all the infrastructure that they need to, you know, to manage their operations. They need to do marketing, sales, and they need all that kind of stuff that they used to buy from, you know, not sophisticated vendors or some guys who were like a software house that did some software specific to sometimes even a city. And the whole adoption of internet has exposed those companies to different services and different opportunities. So I see that as a big sector now in Brazil.
Patrick.
Well, I definitely have an angle at this because we focus in the sector. But right now, really in B2B, especially PMEs, cloud software, we're finding the market to be enormous. In part because it's a large market. I mean, just as an example, one company where my partners were involved with that did its IPO, it's called TOTUS. Raise your hand if you've heard of TOTUS before. So that's what I imagine. It's the third largest ERP company in the world after SAP and Oracle. And why did it grow so much in Brazil? It grew so much because it caters mostly to mid and small size companies. So it has almost a monopoly in these markets. And it's just an example of how much these markets use technology, these small companies. There is a wave, and I dare to say also even in Silicon Valley, and definitely in Brazil, where a lot of investors before said, no, we only do consumer. There's a larger number of them doing this now, which I think is great. It's very positive. There's definitely a lot of things happening. In some sectors of B2B, it's a little bit harder to tap into the markets, but we're definitely certain that we're going to see a lot of successes there. And of course, Jose can probably speak a lot more about the B2C. There's Viajanet, which is a wonderful company. You have Netshoes that have become wonderful category killers, as in players coming in and disrupting the incumbents that have been doing it for ages, but just sleeping on their loins. That's a very typical story in Brazil. You have an enormous company that was launched 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and if you manage to get the right combination of team, banking, governance, and business model, you could be almost like a blue ocean, even though you have a large competitor. So I think we're going to see some successes there, but Jose can definitely speak more about it. And
Thank you, Patrick. No, I mean, let me create a little bit of controversy here, because my views have always been very squared in terms of how do I think I should be investing. Different thing is companies that I'm building, but I'm not a very big fan of investing in innovation, and I know that this might not sound beautiful, but from the point of view of the risk that you take on going a new market, if you go into a model that already exists, that is proven someone else, you know, that it's working, the type of risk that you take goes down to the country risk, and you don't take business model risk. So, I mean, in my eyes, I've always been much more of a fan of investing on companies that have a proven model and just taking the market risk, especially on markets that I know well. Now, what is the next thing in Brazil? I do agree that there is a very interesting twist on the B2B side of things, but I would also say that you have an incredible middle class in Brazil that is growing, and I think that anybody that is going to target that trend and do it well by offering you know, the end consumer with a fantastic and differentiated experience is going to succeed, and that's not that different to how we thought about Viajanet. No, we wanted to make sure that we provided, you know, that new middle class that was basically coming up, which is significantly big, with an opportunity to do things differently and with a much better level of service. So I am still a very big believer that there is massive opportunities in Brazil to build businesses that are B2C. And you know, it's just the beginning. Now, the problem is that a lot of these businesses tend to be much more capital intensive than those you know, that have, I would say, the B2B orientation. So not necessarily, but in a lot of cases, yes. So that is one of the challenges. How do you keep building on businesses that require significant amount of capital when you have a market where you don't have a lot of investors and where capital is scarce, especially at Series B? So I think that opportunities are big, and my suggestion is when you look to a market that is not the US, think about what has happened in other places, no? And look to those stories very carefully, and you know, I'm sure that you'll find a lot of great opportunities, you know, by doing that and understanding how you can customize that to the operation of your own country.
I think for our perspective, we will always probably be involved in the B2C sector. It's just where we come from. It's what we've been doing all along in Europe. We're a bit of a one-trick pony, probably, if at all. It's a trick, so which we're going to continue to push on that. As Jose mentioned, in the growing middle class and so on, the wine model, the food supplements model, I think they fit very well into that. Then at the same time, if I look at the things that we're looking at right now, so this is basically, we want to make a decision in the next couple of weeks to start 1 or 2 new companies. They probably would be in the same space that you mentioned, SMB, B2B software, which is the easy way in for a guy like me who doesn't have much experience with enterprise sales and so on. It's a very lightweight product, catering to, the SMB players in the Brazilian market, that you can still sell maybe via telesales or performance marketing, a bit of an easy way in. I think that would be what we would be pushing, just from our perspective. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a big thing, but for us that's probably going to be high on the agenda. And then one other topic is advertising technology, actually, for us. Pretty specialized thing, but we see a lot of potential stuff that, if I look at the United States, obviously it's ahead. If you look at Europe, behind that, but I think there's still a bit of room for improvement where we can leverage and bring some tech from the United States or from Europe also to Brazil. That's also what we're focusing on, because that's what we have a lot of operational expertise in Europe, as well as building it up also in Brazil.
It's interesting. I didn't hear much about mobile. Brazil has a penetration of about 70% of mobile, and there are more mobile phones than people, and yet the online traffic coming from mobile is very tiny, something about less than 5%. So one would think that there's room for substantial growth in mobile and mobile advertisement as well. What do you think?
What I would say, and I can speak with a very concrete example, that the amount of traffic that we're getting from the mobile side is significantly higher than the number that you mentioned, way significantly higher. So there is an opportunity in mobile. The problem is, how do you make businesses that are sustainable? I mean, the way you monetize advertising in Latin America, it's still very complicated. So how do you make sure that you empower a lot of these businesses that are operating or being developed on the mobile space? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't need to have a mobile play. I mean, I would urge anybody who is building a business in Brazil to think very, very carefully about their mobile strategy very early on. Because in ViajaNet, for example, I think it's 23 or 24% of the traffic is coming from mobile. So, I mean, it is happening. Now, the question is, it's going to take probably significantly longer for those business models to be able to develop and consolidate the same way they have done in the US. But that doesn't mean that the mobile side of things is not important, no? And just to add to the question before, I also think that the online education space is amazing, and we are looking into something as our next move in that space. And what I can say is that the big challenge there is, once again, how do you monetize? What type of business model do you use? Because in emerging markets, I speak mainly about Latin America, people don't like to pay for content. So you need to find ways, creative ways, to monetize it. And then when you look to the advertising side of things, it is, again, the same analogy with mobile. It's very hard to get the monetization and to get people to pay you the right prices, just because the market is not as developed. So just a couple of insights more on that side.
At DGF, we had, if you recall, when I presented our portfolio, one of the companies that became a successful taxi application company. It started trying to be a mobile company. And it was way before its time, because the numbers were not like Jose mentioned and Eveline mentioned, that right now mobile really has reached critical mass. And I think Eric also has an experience in mobile as well, a little bit before its time. And also, the time for mobile is now, I think, for companies to start using mobile more effectively, like ViajaNet is doing. I mean, we have another example in Brazil called Netshoes, which is a very successful e-commerce company in sports goods, especially shoes. And they're bound to do their IPO probably next year. And the CEO is a great guy. We call him to speak at our annual event. And it's amazing what kind of applications they're already putting in live. I mean, one example is they basically have some applications so that they know when a consumer is in front of a physical store where you can buy shoes, that's when they shoot promotions about their products, so that they can show how they have a better product So they do a lot of guerrilla strategies around mobile, which is really, I think, interesting as far as how companies are really pushing the envelope on how that can be used. But as Jose mentioned, I agree that it's hard to find a sustainable standalone business model in mobile. But the opportunities are definitely there. We have one project in the pipe, which is kind of, if you guys are familiar with a company called Reddit and Shopkick, basically mobile platform loyalty programs for large companies. They do the link in between online and offline. That's one market where we might be investing. Another example of how much it's growing mobile is there's one company that's actually even Brazilians, many people have not heard of it. It's called Eveline, and I mean it's a it's $100 million plus revenue company with 20 employees. So you can imagine their EBITDA margins are pretty nice, and but they really piggyback on the operators. I mean, I think part of the reason is that usually you're very dependent on operators for a lot of things in your business. So you have to find a model where you really don't depend on that in terms of a revenue stream. So that's part of the challenge and why mobility has not picked up from a startup perspective, unless, I mean, it's more of a product. It has to be in a product roadmap if you have something or some type of technology. So.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that, my previous company was in the mobile space, so I know most of the challenge there in terms of monetization and distribution. This company that Patrick mentioned, Movil, they've been around for about 10 years or something, and they are tied together to the operators there, the carriers. So they get most of their money from the carriers. So that's a good monetization model, but even them know that this model is going to sustain forever. So they are trying to find some new ways to monetize their audience with selling apps, selling in-app products, doing some kind of content distribution deals with content owners. So they're trying all these different kind of things, and even buying companies to help them keep innovating, launching new products to their audience. About 2 or 3 years ago, we had a lot of mobile phones in the hands of population in Brazil, but most of them weren't smartphones. So that's one of the reasons that we still don't have that much of mobile traffic yet. And the second reason is because the operators in Brazil, the carriers, they didn't have flat fee for internet usage. So they just started doing that in an affordable way. So right now, people are really using the internet. A lot of people, the middle class that's rising, are having their first experience with internet on their cell phones. So they're learning how to use the internet on their cell phones through apps. So that's amazing. I think it's a great opportunity, but the challenge is still in how to monetize that audience. Just to share an example, I had a service back in 2008 that we had 5 million page views generated monthly. And the largest portal in Brazil, UOL, they had combining all their mobile sites, they had 10 million page views. But we couldn't sell the advertising there. We couldn't sell it. We didn't have model. It's very hard to sell online advertising in Brazil, especially for emerging media, because of the way the groups work there, the agencies. Yeah. So it's still a challenge, I would say that. But I agree that every company needs to have a mobile strategy, regardless of how they're going to monetize it or not.
Wonderful. Well, we're getting close to finishing with the panel. Of course, I want to say thank you so much for coming from far to share your experience. We are in Ukraine, as you know. And before we finish, I want you to briefly give a couple of pieces of advice to the entrepreneurs and investors that are here, based on your experience in Brazil.
So yeah, I think just to sum it up, pretty similar to what I mentioned before. I think if you decide to go, just be there for the long run. You're going to be very tired if you run across every super hot, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that is there, right? There's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity probably 3 to 4 times a year. So Don't be too scared about passing one, but if you decide for one, then stick with it. And I think the same is true for Brazil. If you decide to go, then you should be aware that it's up and downs. There's ups and downs. It's an emerging market, so probably you should be willing to invest also significantly over a certain course of time. And the second part is what I mentioned about the teams. Try not to come with a too arrogant mindset, which we observe sometimes with ourselves. Oh, this is the way it should work, and so on. Things are different, even though they might look similar in many aspects. So go with locals, learn a lot, be very open, listen to them, and potentially probably a very good way is to start co-investing with someone who knows the market quite well, and then to learn from there on.
For me, I mean, I'll just go back to being an entrepreneur, and I will be very, very short on this. What I would say is find something that you really love, that you are passionate about, and go do it. And then find people that you love spending time with, that you respect, and do it with them. It doesn't matter if it's in Brazil, in Ukraine, or wherever.
Okay.
So a few thoughts. One I think is important consideration is that the VC and startup market has become global, period. I think it's clear to see many startups here that have global ambitions. It's happening all over the place. I can definitely speak for Brazil that this wave that happened in Brazil really integrated a lot Brazil with Silicon Valley and other markets. And I think with Eastern European countries, with Ukraine, with Russia, with Turkey, I think we're going to find more and more ways in which we can collaborate and do joint ventures. There's a few conversations we had where we certainly think a joint venture is in great, it's definitely something that will really work out great. So I think everybody, I think this is no surprise, but the market has become global. Make sure that when you decide to go global, you find the right partners, be it investors. They really have done stuff all over the world, which are few, but I'm fortunate to be next to some of them here. And make sure you aim high, especially for companies that have a global potential. Make sure you get the right backers, the right capital, and the partners that can really help your company go as far as you can get.
You guys left nothing for me, but the only thing I would say to add that is Brazil is a great place to live. So if you're considering doing business there, just go visit, spend some time there. There's a lot of people, we were talking in backstage about that, a lot of Americans and people from Germany, from other places, like going down there to have a good time while they're building their companies. And if nothing works, at least you get to see the World Cup next year and the Olympic Games 2016. So that's a good excuse to go down there.
On that note, I would say thank you. Let's give a round of applause to her.
And thanks to
Yes.
Eveline. Thank you so much.
you.
Thanks. Thank you, guys. All right. Very good. I think you will stay here, but we have already Patrick coming, so you better stay probably on stage because Patrick will need you. Or what do you think? He can stay with you? Yeah. Should be?
No.
Okay. It's startup competition time, huh?
Let's start with
Patrick
competition
Blake, yeah?
time. It's almost the end of the conference, and we have one more session for you. And of course, the grand prizes that will be handed out by the chairman of the board of Task Group. So you've seen 9 startups so far. We'll see 3 more, and then the jury is going to decide the number 1, 2, and 3. The number 3 wins 5,000 euros. The number 2 wins 10,000 euros. And the number 1 wins 15,000 euros. So who wants to win 15,000 euros? Hands up. Oh, not so many people here in Ukraine. Well, I do.